I came here for the silence. The kind that doesn't just blanket sound, but muffles thoughts too. After Anne died, the world became unbearable. Everyone said words that didn't mean anything, offered food I couldn't taste, and sat in quiet that felt too loud. So I packed up what little I needed: tent, journal, stove, her ring on a necklace, and drove until I hit the green lungs of the Appalachian Trail, an untouched stretch I'd only ever dreamed about hiking. I chose a path far from cell towers, families, and fellow hikers. I wanted nature to swallow me whole, to erase the buzz of a world I didn't ask to return to alone. The trail was still moist from the rain the night before. My boots sank slightly into the softened earth. The air was cool and unscented, and when I breathed it in, it didn't taste like grief. I made camp near a stream around dusk. The sound of water moving over rock filled the background as I boiled instant rice and scribbled in my journal. It was the first time in months I didn't hear a clock ticking in my mind. No doorbell, no condolences, just my own heartbeat and the rustling of leaves. Anne would have teased me about the rice, told me I should have packed her famous chili instead. After dinner, I sat by the fire, fingers toying with the chain around my neck. I whispered to the flame about how empty the house felt, about how I couldn't sleep in our bed anymore, about how the light on the porch still came on at 7, even though no one came home. The stars came out slow, cautious through a veil of clouds. I zipped up the tent and lay there on my back, not ready to sleep but unsure what else to do. My hand drifted over my chest, feeling the cold shape of her ring. I remember thinking how absurd it was that something so small could carry so much. The forest was quiet, not dead quiet, just peacefully indifferent. Bugs chirped, the stream whispered, an owl called out, and I felt that maybe this place could hold me for a while. I must have drifted off. Somewhere deep in the night, I woke up suddenly. No storm, no branches cracking, just a feeling, a pressure in the air. I held my breath, eyes wide open in the pitch, and then I heard it. A bark, low, drawn out, distant. Not a coyote's yip, not a wolf's howl. A bark, one that seemed impossibly deep. A sound that didn't echo but sank. I sat up inside the tent, straining to hear more. Nothing. The forest had gone still again, like it was waiting to see what I would do. I stayed like that for an hour, maybe more. Listening, waiting. Then finally, I lay back down and pulled the zipper a little tighter. I told myself it was nothing. Just a dog, maybe. Someone's lost pet. But deep down, I knew. I was alone. Too far in. And dogs don't bark like that. The morning came pale and gray, like the forest hadn't slept either. I unzipped the tent slowly, half expecting something to be standing right outside, but there was nothing. Just dew, soft earth, and the sound of the stream trickling nearby. I told myself the bark I heard was nothing, probably an echo, a fox maybe. I cooked oatmeal, jotted in my journal, but I couldn't shake the weight in the air, like something invisible was standing behind me with every step I took. I packed up and started hiking again, pushing deeper into the trail. The trees were thicker here, older. Some were split down the middle by time and lightning. Moss clung to the trunks like bruises. As I walked, I began to notice strange impressions in the dirt. Too large to be a deer, too spaced out to be a bear. I crouched down and touched one. It was deep, like whatever left it was heavy. Heavier than any dog. Heavier than me. I stood up and scanned the woods, but everything was still. The only sound was the crunch of leaves under my own boots. I kept moving, convincing myself it was nothing. Just some old tracks warped by rain. But they didn't stay behind me. By noon, they were beside me. Not parallel, but trailing. Always a few yards to the right, cutting into the brush where no trail existed. I tried to brush it off. My breath got tight anyway. The deeper I went, the more the forest felt less like a place and more like a presence. And then I saw it. Between two thick oaks, maybe 20 feet off trail, stood a massive black dog. No collar, no movement, It wasn't sniffing, pacing, growling, just standing there, still as stone. Eyes locked onto me. We stared at each other. It didn't blink. It didn't lower its head. It just stood, as if it had always been there, as if it had been waiting for me to see it. I raised a hand, half out of instinct, half out of hope that it would flinch or acknowledge me. It didn't. Then, without warning, it vanished. Not ran, not turned. One moment there, the next. Gone. I stood frozen, heart pounding in my throat. I wanted to believe I imagined it, that the silence and grief had finally bent something in my brain. But the footprints were real. The unease was real, and what happened next removed all doubt. I pulled out my compass, trying to get my bearings again, but the needle spun in frantic circles. North no longer existed. I tapped the glass, shook it, nothing. The forest had no direction. That's when something dropped at my feet. A dull thump. I looked down. A bird. Not one that had fallen from a tree or hit something mid-flight. It was whole, its wings perfectly folded against its sides, as if it had been placed there. Its eyes were wide and glassy, and it was still warm. No signs of injury, no blood, just dead. I stepped back slowly, pulse thundering in my ears. Something was playing a game I didn't understand. Something old, something patient. The silence I had come for was no longer peaceful. It had teeth now, and they were watching me from the woods. I didn't sleep much after the bird, after the dog. I lay in the tent, half-zipped, heart pacing the dirt around me. I told myself the compass was faulty. I told myself the dog was a hallucination. I told myself the bird was a coincidence. But I packed up fast the next morning anyway, barely touching breakfast, and I walked. Hard. For hours. I pushed past aching calves and dried sweat, deeper into the woods, eyes flicking to every shadow, every broken branch, every glint of light that didn't look quite right. I just wanted distance, but distance never came. Somewhere around midday, I stopped to rest at a spot that looked familiar. Too familiar. I recognized a knot in a tree shaped like a spiral, a fallen birch trunk with moss only on one side. I pulled out my map. I should have been 10 miles south by now, according to my pace. But the surroundings argued otherwise. I'd been here already, hours ago. I kept walking, picked a new direction, didn't care if it matched the trail. I just needed to move. That's when I saw it again. The black dog. Farther this time, maybe 40 yards off, standing on a ridge just above me, completely still, outlined by shafts of sunlight breaking through the canopy. Its eyes weren't glowing or monstrous. That would have made it easier somehow. But no. They were just dark. Flat. Human, almost. It didn't growl. It didn't pace. It didn't blink. It just watched. When I looked down to take a breath, it was gone. This time I didn't even flinch. I just kept walking, pretending not to be scared, pretending I was in control. But the forest had changed. I started noticing the light wasn't falling right. The shadows stretched too far, or not enough. Birds didn't sing. Bugs didn't hum. Everything was muffled, like walking underwater. I tried retracing my steps, but the trail signs were gone. Vanished, posts and all. Even the bark where the blazes were painted looked smooth, unmarked. I began muttering to myself. First, just under my breath. Little things like, keep walking, or, you're fine. Then fuller sentences, louder. By late afternoon, I was talking like I had company. That's where I made camp, I said, pointing to nowhere. We'll be fine. It's just a loop. That night I set up my tent beneath a bent pine, choosing the flattest patch of earth I could find. The air felt heavy, like the sky was pressing down on my lungs. I lit a fire and watched it flicker, trying not to look over my shoulder. The dog came again, closer this time. It stood maybe 10 feet from the edge of the firelight. Not charging, not barking, just there, watching. The flames danced in its eyes, but they never flicked toward them. Its gaze was locked on me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stared back. And just like before, it vanished. But this time, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't lost. It wasn't hunting. It knew this forest. It knew me. And somehow, I felt like it was leading me somewhere. Or maybe keeping me from leaving. Either way, I wasn't alone. Not anymore. And whatever was walking beside me in those woods, it didn't need a trail, because this place was already its home. I don't know how many days I've been out here anymore. My watch died yesterday, or the day before. The sun rises, but it doesn't seem to follow any pattern. Some mornings it shoots straight up like it's in a hurry. Other days it lingers too long in the trees like it's spying on me. I tried using the stars, but they've stopped showing up too. Last night, I think I cried. Or laughed. I'm not sure there's a difference now. I left camp early today, determined to find a landmark. A sign. A break in the trees that said this trail had an end. Instead, I found something worse. It started with a smell. Old metal and mildew. I followed it off trail a bit through a dense patch of underbrush, and that's where I found the gear. A hiking pack, torn at the seams, moss creeping up the fabric. The color was muted, but not from sun. It looked drained, like it had been left here for years. Next to it was a cracked thermos, and beside that, a camera. I picked up the camera, carefully, as if it might bite. The lens was shattered, the body dented like it had been thrown or stomped. I turned it over in my hands and saw initials scratched into the plastic. RC. I don't know who that is. I don't want to. Further up the trail, hanging from the low limbs of a dead pine, were 3 wooden totems, each carved by hand, each no bigger than a fist. Twine bound them to the branches, and they swung gently even though there was no wind. One looked like a face, hollow-eyed and weeping. One was a bird with its wings bound. The third was something I didn't want to describe, but it had teeth. Too many teeth. Then I saw the stones. Dozens of flat rocks pushed into the soil, half buried, arranged in a crescent. Symbols had been scratched into the surface. Runes, warnings, or prayers. I couldn't tell. 2 of the stones had messages in English. One read, "Speak what you bury." Another, directly across from it, "Return unbroken." I backed away slowly. My heartbeat was in my ears. It wasn't just the weight of the place. It was recognition. The words scraped something deep in me, something I hadn't looked at in years. I made it back to my camp just before dusk, and I sat with my recorder, hoping maybe capturing some of this would make it real. Something to play back later, to prove to myself I wasn't unraveling. But when I hit play to test the sound, I didn't hear the forest. I didn't hear myself breathing or birds chirping. I heard me, my own voice, already there, looping. It said, "It's watching again. Don't look at its eyes. Don't let it get too close." I dropped the recorder. I never recorded that. The fire struggled to catch tonight. The wood was dry, the flame weak. But when it finally sparked for just a second, the fire turned green. A flash, sick and unnatural, then gone. Just normal orange afterward, like nothing had happened. But it had happened. And somewhere out in the dark, I knew the dog was watching again. Not hiding, not stalking, just waiting. And I think it wants me to remember something. Something I've spent years trying to forget. I didn't sleep. Not after the green flame. Not after hearing my own voice repeating words I'd never said out loud. I sat with my back to a tree all night, knife in my lap, eyes fixed on the dark. Every rustle sounded like breath. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper against my neck. But the dog didn't come. Not visibly. That almost made it worse. It was easier when I could see it. At least then it felt real. Tangible. But now its presence sank into the trees, soaked into the soil, stretched across the shadows. It didn't need to show itself to remind me it was there. When dawn came, It didn't rise. The light just seeped in slowly, a dull gray glow like someone turned the world's brightness down. I stepped out of camp, every joint aching from staying so tense. I didn't have a direction anymore. The trail was long gone. My compass still spun like a wheel on a game show. But I walked anyway. I don't think I expected to get out anymore. I just wanted answers. Or at least a reason for why the forest kept circling back to me like it couldn't let go. At one point, I stopped to drink from the stream. As I crouched down, I caught my reflection in the water. Only it wasn't quite mine. My face looked thinner, paler. My eyes were sunken, and for a second, I thought I saw something move behind me in the water. Not in the forest, in the reflection. When I turned around, of course, nothing was there. Around noon, I sat on a flat boulder to rest. That's when I must have dozed off. The dream came fast and loud. I was standing in a cemetery. Not just any cemetery, her cemetery. The one I hadn't visited since the funeral. Rain fell sideways, wind howling through the stones, and at the far edge of the plot stood the dog, black, still, staring at me across rows of graves. But this time, it wasn't alone. It was standing over her grave. It didn't move, didn't bark, just looked down at the headstone, then slowly turned its eyes up to mine. I tried to run, to move toward it or away, I don't know. But I was frozen. Then I heard her voice. Anne's voice. Not crying, not angry, just tired. She said, "Why didn't you say goodbye?" I woke up choking on dry air, my skin cold despite the sweat. My boots were gone, my socks soaked. I looked around in panic, scrambled up from the ground, and that's when I saw it. I was standing over a patch of soft earth, barefoot, at least 300 feet from where I'd fallen asleep, and carved into the dirt in long, deliberate lines was her name. Anne, not scratched by an animal, not weathered by time, fresh, as if someone, or something, had used a sharp claw or stick to write it while I slept. My legs gave out, and I dropped to my knees. This wasn't haunting anymore. It wasn't a trick of the woods or the grief looping back on itself. Something was drawing the truth out of me, piece by piece, carving it into the land. The dog wasn't a threat. It was a mirror. And whatever I buried, whatever I refused to say, to face, to feel, it was clawing its way out, watching me through eyes that had waited in these woods long before I ever stepped into them. I didn't bother looking for my boots. The dirt was cold but familiar now, like the forest had finally stopped pretending to be a place and started revealing itself as a mind. Or maybe a memory. Maybe mine. I kept walking, barefoot, following nothing. No compass, no sun. Just a feeling like the trees themselves were guiding me, closing off paths they didn't want me to take, and opening ones that pulsed with something old. The black dog didn't show that day, but I could feel it pacing me, always just out of sight. The air was heavier now, like it was holding its breath. Not a single bird call, not a breeze. The trees didn't move. Everything was waiting. I stumbled on the clearing near sunset. At first, I thought it was a natural break in the woods, but the shape was too precise, round, deliberate, sacred in a way that made the back of my neck crawl. Stones circled the space, not piled or scattered, but embedded into the earth like they'd always been there. As I stepped inside, the forest sound dropped away completely. My ears rang in the vacuum. Then I saw the walls. They weren't made of wood or stone. They were just the natural rise of the earth, curved and pressed in with age. But lining every inch of them were handprints. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Some tiny, some wide and long. All faint, like they'd been pressed into the surface a lifetime ago and left behind like whispers. I approached one of the handprints and touched it gently. The moment my fingers brushed the wall, the air shifted, like something had exhaled. At the center of the circle, carved into the packed dirt, were the same words I'd seen on the stone near the totems. "Speak what you bury, or be buried." I didn't want to move closer, but I did. I stood in the very heart of the circle, the silence pressing so hard on my skull I could hear my own heartbeat echoing like it was underground. And then I heard something behind me. Not a sound, not footsteps, just a presence. I turned slowly. The dog was there, sitting just outside the circle, its front paws right at the line of stone. Still, watching. Its eyes weren't menacing. They weren't angry. They were patient. Exhaustingly patient. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I tried again. Still nothing. The air was too dense, too full. Like the silence itself was a physical thing pressing my words down into my chest. The dog blinked. For the first time. And somehow that was worse than anything. I dropped to my knees. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, hands on the dirt, the weight of every unspoken thing I'd ever swallowed crawling up the back of my throat like vines. I wanted to run. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to disappear. But mostly, I wanted to be heard. And I think the forest already knew that, because it wasn't going to let me leave until I finally said it out loud. I didn't leave the circle. Not right away. I don't know how long I sat there in the dirt, knees dug into the earth, throat aching from the words I still hadn't spoken. The silence pressed down harder than ever, as if the forest had coiled itself around the clearing and refused to exhale until I gave it what it wanted. The black dog remained just outside the ring of stones, unmoving, not growling, not threatening, just waiting, and its patience was unbearable. I stared at the carvings in the dirt. Speak what you bury, or be buried, and realized this place had never been about being lost. It was about being found. I stood up, legs trembling, and stepped fully into the center of the circle. The instant I did, the air thickened, like stepping into warm water. My voice caught in my chest. I tried to speak, but my throat locked. I closed my eyes and forced the words out. I didn't tell her goodbye. My voice cracked. Not really. The trees didn't move. The air stayed still. But something in the soil below me shifted. I left that morning like it was any other, I said. I was late. I was always late. I kissed her forehead, told her I'd see her at dinner. My voice dropped to a whisper. There was no dinner. The silence deepened. She called me from the car, I continued. Said the brakes were acting up. I told her to call a mechanic. She laughed. Said I worry too much. My jaw clenched. I didn't worry enough. My hands curled into fists. She died screaming and I wasn't there. I wasn't even close. I was in a meeting, talking about budgets. I didn't even check my phone until the paramedics had already given up. The words spilled faster now, pouring from a place I'd buried under months of pretending, of distractions and empty condolences. I told everyone I was at peace, that I'd accepted it. But the truth is, I hated her for leaving. Even if it wasn't her fault, I hated the way people pitied me. I hated the silence of the house. I hated every stupid memory that refused to fade. The black dog shifted. For the first time, it lay down. Slow, deliberate. I took a shaky breath. I wished it was me, I whispered. Every day. But not because I wanted to save her. I just didn't want to feel this anymore. I didn't want to carry it. I didn't want to wake up and pretend she wasn't in every room, every drawer, every sound. And then, for the first time in days, the air moved. A wind rose from nowhere, circling the clearing, brushing the handprints like ghostly fingertips. The trees groaned like they'd been holding their breath too long. The silence cracked. A bird chirped. Just once. But it was enough to make my knees buckle. And when I looked up, there was a trail behind the dog. A narrow, moss-covered path that hadn't been there before. A path glowing faintly in the soft evening light, winding gently between the trees. I stood, numb, every breath feeling like the first one in years. I stepped out of the circle. The dog didn't follow. It just watched. Its eyes calmer now. Almost kind. I walked. For hours, maybe. Or minutes. I don't know. But eventually, through a break in the trees, I saw something so absurdly out of place that I almost laughed. My car. Parked exactly where I'd left it. Untouched. Dusty. Waiting. I climbed in. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, the wedding ring still resting cold against my chest. And I realized I'd survived. But I hadn't left the forest whole. Some part of me, maybe the part that couldn't forgive, or forget, or stop mourning the life that should have been. That part stayed behind. And somewhere, deep in that ancient wood, under watchful black eyes, it will never stop waiting.